I had the freedom to just play and write. And that's all it was. It lived at the edge of the story, and I didn't know what was going to happen next. But unlike writing a novel, I was 100% okay with that. Sometimes you can get to a point where you can feel, you step outside yourself a little bit, and the story takes its own life, and it affects you as if you were experiencing it for the first time.
Welcome to Tabletop Talk, the podcast where I delve into the minds of tabletop gaming creatives. Join me as I uncover their creative process and inspirations. You are in the right place if you enjoy listening to thoughtful interviews with creative people.
Hey, this is Ross Bryant, and when I'm not playing characters who are being driven mad by chthonic deities that dwell in the dark abyssal gulfs between the stars, I'm listening to Tabletop Talk.
Howdy friends, Craig here. Today my guest is John Cohen. John is the creator of the popular Tale of the Maniticore podcast and the One Shot in the Dark RPG. He's a gamer, musician, and educator from Toronto. When he's not broadcasting his solo adventures, he can be found repairing electric guitars and designing and making guitar pedals. John, this is long overdue. Welcome to the third floor.
Hey, thank you for having me. The third floor is much higher than I had anticipated, and the glass floors is a really nice touch.
We don't allow skirts on the third floor. So for those of you listening, we found out, I think, John, you reached out to me. We found out that we have a mutual admiration for each other's show. We've also have discovered, because we've been running ads on each other's pods, that we have a cross-germination of listeners. So I'm sure there's several people here listening that have listened to your show and vice versa.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, you told me that you will also listen, which means that I can't spring the most obvious question that everybody asks a new guest on a podcast. And let's get your origin story. So at one point, John, you knew nothing about this hobby. You didn't know you could grab a sheet of paper, roll some dice, and pretend to be somebody else. And then it was put in front of you for the first time. Can we go back there?
Yeah. So the Wayback Machine takes us to 1983. I think I was 10 years old. So I'm 50 now. And so 51. And
it doesn't matter after 50.
You're right. It doesn't make it.
You go in decade chunks
just
after
old,
this.
Just old now.
Exactly.
So 10 years old, my older brother gets a copy of the Purple Box, Moldvay, and somehow I think he needed players because he would normally have nothing to do with me, and but I think he must have needed players or something. So he introduces me to this game, and it absolutely broke my young brain. Like, every piece of art in that I've memorized. Some of them I think I just would look at, like the Errol Otis picture of the weapons rack. Just that alone was enough to like fuel my imagination for like limitlessly, and it turned out that this D&D thing was like the thing I wanted the most, although I didn't know it at the time, but I just couldn't get enough of it. And I think, like most people, in the absence of any examples of play, we didn't know what to do with it, because our whole experience of games was like, checkers and Monopoly, and so we thought that the map must be a board, and that we saw the little pictures of miniatures. So we thought you must move these miniatures around on a board, and there was reference to turns and rounds. And so we completely misinterpreted those, thinking my turn, your turn. And then once we all had a turn, that must be a round. And so I think we played it wrong for a little bit. And I think probably a lot of people had that exact same kind of experience.
In those days, John, there was no D&D being played.
Right.
There was just everybody playing their own version of D&D, which is part of, I think, where the tradition comes from. It's where a lot of the arguments happen. When you start getting grognards like me and you in these conversations, you and I could argue about Moldvay D&D and be talking past each other because you played a different game than I did.
That's fair.
And we we just didn't. And this is another thing, not speaking of being old, like there's a lot of the newer generations that are getting these games that have so much available to them, you know, with YouTube videos and with podcasts and things like that.
Right.
And the old man in me wants to go, yeah, it's so much more fun when you had to figure it out on your own. Bullshit. It's better now.
It's a double-edged sword, right? Because there was no Matt Mercer effect when we were playing as kids because there were no examples. There was no bar to compare your game to. It was just your game, right or wrong. That's just what it was.
I'm not convinced that Matt Mercer thing is real.
I'm not either.
And just because, like, there's a couple friends that are into D&D, and they asked me because they knew I was into other games. They're like, "Will you introduce us to a different game?" And they found D&D as adults via Critical Role, and I knew that whole story. And I'm like, "Shit! Like, what are they anticipating here?" Because I'm sure as hell that's not my style of running a game. So I went to my standard Blades in the Dark. If you've only played D&D, this is what we're going to play, and ran it through. And there was no mention of that at all.
Right.
You know, no feeling of that at all. But it's got a nice little alliteration to it, and it's got a nice little, you know, like a sound to it. But anyway. Yeah. I'm distracting from Roger's story. I want to go backwards just a little bit. So you mentioned at 10 years old, John, this was put in front of you, blew your mind, and you didn't know what you needed. As an adult now, looking back, do you have a sense of 8-year-old John and 9-year-old John that led up to 10-year-old John? Do you think that there was things that you enjoyed growing up to the point where it was put in front of you that prepped you to be so primed for the game?
Yeah, absolutely. I was kind of a free range kid. I was a latchkey kid. My parents both working all the time, but they were very, very supportive of our being creative kids. Nice. So we had this basement that was just, you know, paints and art equipment and all kinds of stuff. And so we would make stuff constantly. And we far more often that we would make a game than we would buy and play a game. And so it came very naturally, I think, once we understood what this thing was, that we would be making stuff all the time. And so, yeah, I think that it made a lot of sense that it kind of went that way. Another thing that I just remembered today, because I knew you were going to ask me this question. It turns out that the old purple D&D box was exactly the right size to fit my brother's collection of porno magazines. And so
oh my goodness.
I would sneak into his room and raid the box. And so like if D&D isn't enough for you, you're mad. But in this case, it was D&D and also porno magazines.
Again, what young kids don't understand.
I know.
Is like, when we were at that curious age, like that, when you had the friend whose father had the stash, or you had a big brother that had, like, that shit was gold. Because we didn't know why we wanted to look at it, but we did. And it's just, oh God, that's really, really funny. I'll never forget finding my father's stash.
Right.
And just the Mission Impossible levels I would go to when they were, you know, not in the house.
Exactly.
To get to them, to see them, and then to put everything back so it would never get noticed.
Where's the excitement now?
Funny.
Where's the excitement now? Where's the challenge?
Right? That's really funny. So you play with your brother. Now, first of all, I guess, can you give me an idea of the age gap? So he brings you in, doesn't normally talk to you, but says any players.
So yeah, he's like 2 years older than me, and so I think he had a couple of friends that would come over, and a couple of my friends, and so we would sort of cobble together a group. And but I'm sure looking back, I spent, for every hour I played the game, I'm sure I just read those books.
Yeah.
3, 4, 5 times as much, and so I had a very sort of internal, private world of D&D kind of happening, even outside of gaming. And I totally would go and read the module in advance, and, you know, find out where the secret doors were.
You're a bad person, John.
I am.
So when does your brother come out of the picture, or does he stay in the picture for a long time?
No. As the older we got, and sort of as we went from like children to teens, that 2-year gap in age became a chasm. And so, but by then I was already hooked and doing my own thing, and I had my own friends, and if you're a certain vintage, you know that there was a terrible, terrible, terrible stigma attached to the game. It was right in the smack dab in the middle of Satanic Panic. So it was a deeply, deeply unpopular social death kind of thing to do. So it didn't last, actually. I played it for a few years into high school, and then I couldn't take the pressure anymore, and I bowed out for decades.
What brought you back? So how long is decades? 2 decades? Were you 20, 30? When did you come back?
I came back in the pandemic. It was
you're very similar to me.
2020. Yeah, like the pandemic, awful as it was, did one good thing, and I think it created a lot of art.
Yeah.
Got a lot of people with a lot of time that they didn't have before. And, that project that they've always wanted to do, and now they could do it. Heck, you almost had to do something. We were all so cooped up.
God, so true. Now, so in those decade spans, right, from high school to the pandemic, which is 15 years, right?
More, yeah. Okay, sure, yeah. 16. Maybe.
What was the hobby itching along the way? Did you find yourself keeping tabs on it, thinking about going back to it? Were you like me, where every once in a while I just would buy a book of something, right?
Yes and no. I never stopped loving the genre, but I did not think I was coming back. Because in my mind, that stigma was as bad as ever. And I saw the evidence to the contrary, but I just didn't believe it.
It's all you knew. Yeah.
It's all I knew. So I would get the fix through video games and movies and novels. And even that, I did it. I was closeted, like a closeted fantasy novel reader. I was. And to be honest, I'm still sensitive about who I will talk to about my gaming hobby. It's not so much now because I am old, and one nice thing about getting old is you kind of don't care anymore.
Yep.
I just don't want to have to explain it to the blank-faced person that kind of,
You know what's funny about it is, I want to say maybe 10 years ago, John, is when I stopped dodging it. Right. And for a couple reasons. One, there's enough awareness now about board games and role-playing games that they don't look at you like I've never heard of a freaking thing like this before. Like Catan. People know Catan now. Just about everybody knows that. And Pandemic and Dungeons and Dragons. So that helps, because I don't have to go back to very, very big basics when talking about it.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, there's degrees that I get into and I don't get into depending on the crowd, the person I'm talking to. But now even professionally, I have come out of the closet. So even when I'm talking to, C-suite clients on a daily basis, it'll come up, just shooting the shit with somebody. And I'm just constantly amazed at, I've never had somebody go, well, that's weird, or even have that tone. Every single time they're like, no kidding, that is super interesting. And either it'll stop there, but I've had CFOs in conversations go, I keep hearing about this. Can you tell me more about it? And man, I send them down, and I have people that are like, Craig, can you recommend some games after like two months after, it does it. And then what makes me really happy is that more than once I've talked to people in a professional environment and have found out, they've said, hey, Craig, we bought Catan, we bought Pandemic, or whatever it was that they bought because you recommend. That was usually like something better than that, like Splendor or something. And they're like, now we have couples come over for game night. And how great that is. But I understand what you're saying there, John. And the only thing I can tell you for advice that you didn't ask for is I just stopped giving a shit.
Yeah. I wish I could. I wish I could, but I can't.
And it's arrogance too, right? Because I feel like, I consider myself competent. And if this is what makes you decide that I'm not competent or I'm not somebody you want to, then fuck you.
Then see ya. Yeah.
Right? I'm good
Yeah.
then. And, you know, I mean that like when I'm at parties, socially meeting strangers or, you know, professionally or whatnot. But you're right. There are generations that don't completely understand. Like the joke I always used to say is like, you'd have to go to the underpass and you'd have a passcode to try to find other people to play games with.
Yeah.
And my gaming circle when I was in high school, we did not tell anybody else outside of that circle that's what we did.
Oh, there's a price to pay. Yeah.
Yeah, there was socially definitely a price to pay,
Yeah.
and that doesn't even get into the morality piece of the satanic panic. All right, so pandemic strikes.
Yep.
You're getting claustrophobic. You're going a little stir crazy, but you have been following the genre. When does the gaming sneak back in again?
So I guess a couple of years maybe leading up to that pandemic, everybody goes home and makes a podcast or writes a novel or whatever. I had discovered podcasts in general and started filling up my commute. But I didn't know what to listen to. And so I was just kind of taking random pot shots at shows. And I came across the McElroy brothers, which, I mean, not a surprise. They're very high profile. And I probably saw a clip of, you know, My Brother, and Me. And then I found the Adventure Zone, and they were doing D&D. Nice. And of course, you know, secret closet fantasy lover me is like, hell yes. Yeah. And even though they were just kind of crapping all over it, they're so funny and they're so smart and they're so good. I loved it. And like, you know, even though it's very far from what I'm doing, they're great and they're no brilliant. Question. All three of them are brilliant. It's unnatural that all three brothers should be so brilliant, but they are. Yep. And I learned from listening to them that a show could have an emotional depth, like truly be touching, which is all the more of an accomplishment given that they're just laughing their way through 90% of it, but that other 10%, sometimes they go to the root and it gets deep. And I found it very touching and affecting, and I was involved. So I started to look for D&D podcasts, and I looked and looked and looked. I didn't find things that were as good as that. I found a ton of comedy things, and then I stumbled across this one show called The Iron Realm. And if you've heard my show,
I'm not familiar with that.
It's something that I refer to a lot because the guy that made it, Abel Enzo, I want to say accidentally birthed a new genre. And I can't say for sure it's accidental. I should ask him. He's one of the very few interviews I've ever conducted. I didn't ask him if it was accidental. But he was doing this game. It was a solo play game. Another thing I would never have gotten near with a 10-foot pole. Are you kidding? Yep. I would have scoffed. To be gentle and polite, I would have scoffed. That cannot be done. It's a social game.
It inherently makes no sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
It turns out it does. Anyway. So anyway, I was listening to his show, and I was captivated by it. And I think the reason was he kind of took it seriously the way Lord of the Rings takes it seriously, as opposed to, Barty McBardface is seducing a dragon, and the kind of there seems to be kind of two camps in how you can do things. And then there's the rare exception of like the Glass Cannon, who plays the serious game, but they joke on the side, and they pull it off again because they're so talented. They're so talented, and rarely do the lines cross. Anyway, so this guy Abel of the Iron Realm, he was doing this serious thing. He was doing this solo play, and he would just kind of describe it. He would say, "Okay, so they're going to fight my characters are going to fight some kobolds," and then he would do the rolls and describe it and stuff like that. And I was like, "This is lightning in a bottle. This is taking me back to 1983. I am living. This is amazing." And he did this. He had this idea where he thought, I'm going to be the first ever play-by podcast. And so he had this this notion. You could attach your character to the fate of one of my characters and play along. He would do these like extensive mapping sessions where he would spend 20 minutes saying, okay, go to A14 on your map and draw a 20 by 20 foot square room with a exit in the top. I never got into any of that stuff, and I never got into any of the play by podcast stuff. It just wasn't my thing. I just like to listen to him playing. He was playing basic D&D BX. And then he did another thing, which changed the whole game for me. He started to make these like short story audio drama vignettes where to add a dimension, he would just sort of like switch into narrator mode, and then he would have the characters speak in voices, and it was a 2 or 3 minute short story. And I thought, this is amazing. I'm going to find 100 other podcasts just like this, and that's all I'm going to do until this pandemic is over. I'm just going to listen to these incredible audio drama versions of D&D games. How brilliant is that? Amazing. And so I looked and looked and looked, and I found 0 of them. Yeah. Like there weren't any. And then I think, was it even maybe through the McElroys, where I heard this quote from Lin-Manuel Miranda, who said his advice to young artists was to make the thing that you wished existed but didn't exist. I'm paraphrasing. And I thought, especially as lockdown dragged on and on, I have a studio. I have a nice microphone. I have experience with audio engineering and stuff like that. I know BX like the back of my hand. There is no reason why I wouldn't be the one to make it. I never had any intention to do that.
Isn't that something?
And I thought, I should do this, because if not me, like who else? Right. Who's better situated to do this? I'm an English teacher who loves old school D&D, and I have a microphone. And I know how to use the digital audio workstation. Yeah. Like I should do this thing. So I sent away to AliExpress for a set of dice, because I had nothing. I got rid of everything. And when that set of dice came in the mail, and I heard that little rattle, instantly transported. And I mean, I was already sold, but that was like a moment for me where I was like, this is it. I miss this, and I had no idea how much I missed it. And now we're doing this thing. And so I started making the show, and basically what I did is I took the Iron Realms idea of having you kind of ping pong between I'm the DM talking about what's happening, what's going to happen, and then I really decided to lean into this audio drama thing, because I thought that was like the strongest thing, and I thought I can really take this somewhere, because I could tell by listening to the Iron Realm that he didn't have proficiency with audio engineering, so it was very home, like scratch built. And I thought, I can do this in a way that will sound a little bit produced. And basically, that's what I did. So I had no idea what I was doing. I had a model of one show, and even that, I was kind of taking it somewhere else, because I thought, well, I'm gonna blow up the parts of his show that I love, and I'm gonna take away the parts that aren't for me, like the mapping. That's going to be gone. He would put a lot of ads for his own products in his show, and I thought, well, I won't do that. I'll just do more of what for me was the good stuff. No shade on anything that he was doing. It was just my own taste, right?
He's got his thing. Yeah, it inspired you for crying out loud.
He's the OG granddaddy. Anyway, so I started to make the thing, and you put it out there, and well, podcasting is a cruel mistress at the beginning, because, you start to watch the numbers come in, and you see that today 6 people listen to your show. And, but I didn't care, 'cause I had no expectations. I was just making it because it was fun, and it felt exciting, and it was a mode that I'd never really seen before. It wasn't an actual play, and it wasn't an audio drama. And eventually I ended up calling it a semi-actual play. I don't know when I started calling it that, but that's what it is. It's a mashup between actual play and audio drama, and you just basically flip back and forth and back and forth.
So I've got a ton of questions on what we've covered so far. So the first thing is we had an interesting talk earlier about different types of play, right? So Glass Cannon plays a certain way, the Adventure Crew does it a certain way, Critical Role does it a certain way. When you look at your play as 10-year-old and into high school, what did that play look like? As
a kid, it was mostly a power fantasy.
Right.
Like I would dream up these characters that were grossly overpowered. And eventually I would just add things to the character sheet that didn't happen in game just to jack up their strength. Yep. It became like the game actually kind of fell away and became unimportant after a while. And I would just live in the fantasy of having a character. Actually, I can specifically remember one. There was a Dragon magazine article that was the anti-paladin. And it had like a cool illustration, and it was like, I wouldn't have known what a Byronic hero was at the time, but that's what it was. And I totally like sucked into the idea of this like evil character, but as the hero. And so I made this character. You have to forgive me, I was 10 or 11 years old.
Sure.
I named him Dragon Slayer. That was his name.
Nice.
That first name Dragon, last name Slayer. And I would eventually, like, I kept this character. I don't even know if he played a single game. He just existed on a character sheet. But eventually I would fill like little legal pads with monster descriptions of his army. Like, it was so cool. I was practically being an accountant for a game that never happened and never would, and a character that would probably never play. I was just fully living this life in my head. A very weird thing to do, to fill a ledger with stat blocks of this character's army. I didn't earn that character. I just made it up. Anyway, when you're 10, that's it. And so that was kind of my earliest games. And you know, when I was in high school, we were into like advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Basic was forgotten. We thought, it's for babies, basics for babies. And we were into the first and second edition AD&D. And at that time, I was starting to, like, air quotes, mature as a player. And I was starting to understand, like, weaknesses make you interesting. And verisimilitude makes it interesting. So I would purposefully give my characters these, like, very pedestrian names, or make them ugly, or lean into weaknesses and stuff like that, just because... I somehow along the way I learned, these characters they're more interesting to play.
So you mature a little bit then in high school, you leave the hobby. How much was your perception of play changed as you started listening to these APs? So you start picking up these podcasts, you start hearing all these different styles of play that we just started talking about. Did it crash up against your perception of what the game was? Did it change your perception of what play looked like?
It did, because... they say you can't step in the same river twice. And boy, had the game changed. Which makes sense. It was 30 years. Maybe a little, it was 30 years. And so I came back and, the story game had happened, and that was fine. I enjoy some of those actually very much. But I'd never heard of them. But kind of what I saw, especially when I looked at like 5e, I didn't like it. So just my own taste. I didn't like it. It felt overpowered. It felt like Marvel Superheroes, the fantasy game to me. Yep. And in fact, the earliest episodes of my show, I kind of found my identity by what I wasn't. And I was totally a grognard about it. And I kind of regret it now because I was, a curmudgeon. And I was kind of like, there won't be any tabaxis named Mr. Paws, multi-class ninja pirate. I won't be doing any of that, folks. Yep. None of that here. It's just good old D&D. And so I was guilty of that. And I thought, I'm playing in hardcore mode. So now I've relaxed a little bit, and I realized that, people can play however they want to play. And I signed up for a bunch of 5e games at local game clubs, like through meetup.com, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to try it online. The few online games I'd had, they all felt like listening to your favorite band through computer speakers. Like, it was good, but it's not good. It was better than not listening to the song, but it wasn't quite there. And so it took me a long time to play 5e because, again, quarantines, etc., meant I couldn't join a live game forever. And when I did, I disliked it. And I tried a bunch. I tried again and again and again. And I just... Maybe it was the mix of players, maybe it was the GMs I found, but I just found it unsatisfying because it just felt too easy. Like
interesting.
You couldn't fail. And at least, again, it's all taste, but for me, stakes equal excitement. So I want my character to have a chance to fail or die. And for me, that's what makes it exciting. I know it's not for everybody, and I get that.
Have you found that since, though? So have you found a scenario where you found a table that kind of ticked that box for you?
Oh, yeah, I did. Eventually, I found a few folks, and we settled on Old School Essentials. And so I ended up DMing a campaign that went for about 2 years using Old School Essentials.
Nice.
And now I'm a player, which is fun. I think it's great if you can do both sides. You really learn a lot. You learn how to be a better DM by playing. You learn how to be a better player by DMing. All that stuff. And so now we're actually playing this Star Wars game, but it's really just Old School Essentials with a reskin. That engine kind of works for everything.
It does.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a conflict resolution system.
Yeah,
right?
and it's kind of like right up front. If you don't know what to do, just make it up and then move on.
Yep.
So we never look up rules, and it's very rare that like a book gets opened up.
You listen to a guy doing a solo play. You realize that's a real thing. Mm-hmm. It sounds like a life of creativity snuck in. You say, I can do this.
Yeah.
And it's very much an inspired by at the very beginning, right?
Yeah.
When do you think you truly parted ways with your source? When did it become not you doing what you liked that he did? Mm-hmm. When did it become just you doing you? Do you know that, or do you have a feeling for that?
I think I have the moment.
Oh, wow.
The way I play is it's kind of like you're writing a script or a book. And then when you need dice, you grab dice and roll them, and that's how the game goes. So it happens in packets. I play for 30 minutes, meaning I'm writing my story for 30 minutes, including dialogue. And if a situation comes up where dice are required, then I stop typing, I roll dice, I interpret the results, and keep on typing. So I was on my 4th episode, and I had this idea, I could do a flashback. You can't do a flashback in D&D. That's not part of the game, but I could do a flashback. And so I started doing this flashback, and I had this character as a child running through her manor house, and there's a funeral going on, and she's little, so when she rushes into the room, she has to kind of part through all of these robes and cloaks, and she's going through this forest of robes and cloaks, and then she gets to where she's going, and she's in front of her dead grandfather who's sitting on this chair, and his eyes have been removed and replaced with silver balls. And I remember writing that. Actually, I was just jazzed about doing a flashback in a D&D game. But when I had this moment where she looks up and there's this really macabre, ugly, weird thing, that was the first time I thought, darn it all, I've got some in here. Because this is...
Yeah.
Because it's weird to say, but sometimes I'll write something and then I can feel it. Mm-hmm. Has an emotional charge. It's not all the time. And then sometimes when I'm doing the sound design, maybe the narration and the music just happen to match up the right way. The major goes to minor just on the right word. A lot of the time that happens by accident. Yeah. I've kind of learned to maximize my chance for happy accidents now, but doing it purposefully is almost impossible. You have to be Hans Zimmer. But at that moment, first when I sort of wrote that scene, and then again when I created that scene in audio, that was like the first kind of moment where I was like, oh, this might be good. This might be like. Yeah. Good, because I could feel it. It's like if you're writing a song and you get a certain turn and you can feel this is quality. It's weird to say about the thing I made, so I'll just say it's not all the time. I wish it was more, but sometimes you can get to a point where you can feel you step outside yourself a little bit, and the story takes its own life, and it affects you as if you were experiencing it for the first time. And so that was the first time I realized this mode, the genre, whatever, this semi-actual play, it can be developed in ways that a D&D game or an actual play or an audio drama can't. Like, there are some strengths here, and that was my first kind of discovery, and actually it felt like exploration, because I'd never seen that in anything. This idea of a flashback, and then from there I got the idea, well, wait a minute, I could do antagonist POV. That doesn't happen in a D&D game either. You can't tell the players, hang on now, we're going to check in with the villain, and it's going to be, for the next 2 hours, we're just going to see what they're up to. And you guys sit tight. You can't do that. But if you're doing a solo game, you absolutely can. And so that was another time where it was like, this is a brave new world of storytelling. And I was just so excited to be writing. I felt like I was on the edge of something, some wave. Yep. Yeah.
So Tale is a very interesting hybrid, and I found it very interesting when I first started listening, because you know me, I like the creative process. Hearing things change, hearing you do something, and then I see it coming back more later, and in my mind, I'm sitting, with my perspective, going, oh, I can see John. Like that clicked for John, and now he's pushing that a little bit more and exploring that a little bit more. We've also talked about how you left this hybrid and have gone and played just the game.
Yeah.
Right. Is there a moment where you would split it again and just explore writing? Would you ever envision yourself going, I'm going to put the game away, and I think I'm going to focus just on creating a diceless story, an audio drama, or writing a book? Or is that aspect of this hybrid ever pulled at you?
So definitely I have sort of had that call. I mean, if you're a DM, probably you have a half-finished novel in your closet. That's my feeling. I do. The problem for me when trying to write a novel, I tried it when I was a teenager. I tried it again as an adult. Again, totally on the sly, closet. But I didn't finish either of them because I could never find an ending. Like, I'm totally fascinated by story design, screenwriting, all that kind of thing. I got a bunch of books on my shelf about that craft, and most of them kind of boil down to backwards design. You begin with the end in mind. Maybe you have a problem and a solution, and then you figure out what complications will occur in the meantime, and how will I resolve in a way that is exciting and interesting, and maybe has a gotcha moment. That seems to be very popular for fantasy and action and stuff like that. That thing that you forgot comes back later on. And so I didn't have that backwards design in place when I was writing. And so I would write, and it was pretty good, but I would write myself into a corner, or I'd write myself into a kind of into the weeds so far. Was like, where is this going? How is this going to resolve?
What the hell am I doing?
And like, if I resolve it, is it going to be satisfying? And I knew the answer was no. And I always had tremendous respect for people who could either have the whole picture in their mind and get there, or even more maddening, somebody like Stephen King, who just writes and gets there, and it's quite often fantastic. Yep. But he's the genius. He's Stephen King, and I'm just me, and I knew I could never get there. And that's why doing it this way is for me. It takes away all the fear of will it be satisfying in the end, or at least most of the fear of will it be satisfying. Of course, I hope it's still satisfying in the end. But a novel or a movie, that makes a promise. The end is going to resolve in a satisfying way. And if not, you will hate this movie or you will hate this book and you won't recommend it. Yep. But a game, nobody expects that. People maybe hope for it, but when you sit down with your buddies and play some D&D, nobody's thinking, this better resolve in a satisfactory way in 2 years or I'm out of here. That doesn't happen. Right. You just play and you live in the moment, and it evolves the way it's going to evolve. And if your characters make it, they make it, and if they don't make it, they didn't make it. And there is no contract of a satisfying. There's certainly no backwards design. If there is, you might be doing it wrong.
I agree.
But with Maniticore, I had the freedom to just play and write. And that's all it was. It lived at the edge of the story, and I didn't know what was going to happen next. But unlike writing a novel, I was 100% okay with that. Totally liberating.
So something that amazes me, John, that I'm discovering as I play a lot now, with the channel and stuff like that, I've got 4 or 5 games going at once, and I've gotten my reps in these last 2 years, 3 years. And one concept, and it's a concept I've talked to several people about, and something Anthony Boyd, Runeslinger, as he's known online, is very much has been a mentor for me in trying to understand this idea of emergent play, where there is no plot, there is no story, there is a premise, and we play. And the way he puts it is not story as a product, but story as a byproduct, right? And one thing that really blows my mind, and I want to know whether this rings for you or not, is, and this is an unbaked thought, so I might listen to this 2 years from now and go, what the fuck was Craig talking about? But it's really incredible how we piece together the story. We piece together the 3 acts. We piece together the structure after play. And I don't know if that's happened to you as you've been creating what you're making. Is there situations where you are playing, typing, rolling dice, and then you look back and go, holy shit, look at what this formed. Look at this arc that just, I wasn't creating an arc. I wasn't following an arc. This arc emerged from that. Does that happen to you? Yeah, the story happens. And I think there's like a flashpoint somewhere in terms of my podcast. It's around 10 to 12 episodes in. Enough things have happened, and they might feel like a chain of random things. But if you're kind of paying attention to your own game, and you don't just say like, we meet some orcs, we fight some orcs, we move on, forgotten. If you kind of pay attention to those things that happen and ask some questions, well, why were there orcs there? What were they doing there? Where did they go? Did we defeat them? If we didn't, did they move on and do something else? The pieces will start to come together in ways that you never would have dreamt of. And little throwaway, even little comments that you make, they can come back. And again, you have to pay attention to your own game. They can come back in a way that is so delightful and so surprising, even to you, even as a solo player, which shouldn't even be possible, but it totally does happen all the time. And with a group, it can be even better, right? Because now it's not just your ideas, it's you're kind of crowdsourcing this emergent story. So yeah, the answer is absolutely yes, but I do find it can take a few sessions before you get enough. I think of it like a connect the dots picture. A few dots, there's no picture.
you get enough dots and you start to see something, even if there was never any picture there to begin with. You're going to see something by combining all of these points.
Well, and you also learn about your character, right? Your character goes from a sheet of paper to with stats and numbers on it, and you play within that realm, and then things happen to this character, and aspects of this character emerge out of the character sheet, not out of you almost. It's almost like the Robert E. Howard, like I just listened to Conan on my shoulder and wrote down what he told me, that type of experience, right? And it's where, for me, that's where the magic is in this hobby. And to your point of a truly unique medium, which is what you've created with Maniticore, that's true of the hobby in general, which is there's nothing else that does this quite the way it does. So the other thing that you mentioned, John, that I wanted to get back to is, and God, I felt this in my bones, where you put something out and like 6 people listen to it today. Now, I don't know about you, but every time I look at my numbers, it blows my mind.
Yeah.
And like my stuff is small. Like my podcast is a small podcast.
One of the things about podcasts is who even knows what the benchmarks are for success?
Right.
I don't know. With YouTube, you can see that your score is right there. That's got to be very stressful.
Well, but like, so I look at let's use YouTube as the example, right? So, Mothership, or my Mothership one is I forgot the last time I looked at it. It's 50,000 people have listened to it or watched, right? And you compare that to, Seth Gorskowski gets that in the first 20 minutes when he puts a video out, he gets that many views, right? So again, comparatively very small. But there are moments, and I want to know if this happens to you, where I stop and I look at those numbers and go, that's 50,000 human beings.
100%. 100%.
That have sat down and listened to it. And I felt that at 50,000. I felt it at 10,000.
Yes.
I felt it at 400.
Yep.
Did that happen with you as you grew?
Oh, 100%. 100%. It's a bit of a devil, because when you start with that 6 per day, and 3 of them were you, right? Right. And
oh God, that's so true.
and it's depressing, but you realize I'm just starting, and there's no walk by traffic with podcasts. You better hustle if you want people to listen. Like, A, you better make the highest quality thing you can make, and B, you have to hustle. You have to promote it, because it's not the case that if it's good, people will come. You must promote. Anyway, so you've got your 6 people, and then a couple months later, now you're at 60. And that's still not a high number, but it's 10 times what you were getting, so you're thrilled. And then a few months later, now you're getting 100 a day. And it's like, wow, 100 people a day? I'm a high school teacher, and that's all of my students. That's right. I have 100 students, and it's as if all of them were listening every single day. Holy bananas! That is so amazing, and you're grateful and you're satisfied. And then pretty soon you're not, because you'll hear somebody else talk about their numbers. I can remember some distinct times where I heard other podcasters share their numbers, and I thought, I'm not happy. 5 minutes ago I was ecstatic, and now I'm miserable. And it is a cruel game that way, because what do they say something like, if you want to be unhappy, start comparing yourself. It's so true. It's so true.
Yeah, misery comes with comparison.
Oh boy. Anyway, so you, like you're saying, if you can stop and think, wow, 500 people downloaded my show today, or maybe on a release day, it's like 13, 14, 1,500 people.
Yeah.
That's like a high school full of people. It's a parking lot full of people, and it blows my mind. And so whenever I do hear about whatever podcast that just got their millionth download, and I'm not there yet. I'm getting there, but I'm not there yet. When I hear that, I feel kind of like crap. I was like, oh, I thought I was succeeding, but now I can see that I'm not. But then I try and tell myself, are you kidding? You had 1,000 people download your show today. That's That's amazing. And then if I look at my total downloads, that's 2 or 3 small cities worth of people. It's mind blowing. And if you can stop and sort of be grateful for that, I think it's helpful. I mean, I'm guilty of. I'm on the seesaw.
It's a roller coaster.
I'm on the seesaw.
It is. Yeah.
But I try and have those moments of gratitude, where you're like, wow. Really, if 5 people listen to this, that should be enough. If 1,000 people or more listen to this, that's now I'm starting to lose. Like, I don't even know what that number looks like. Now it's a sea of faces.
No, that's true. Now, did it happen? What was your growth like? Are there moments where like suddenly you're like, what the hell? Like I just had huge jump ups, or has it just been a nice, gradual, slow growth?
It's been extremely slow and steady, and this like inclined plane that it's weird how consistent it is.
That's cool.
At some point, I started to kind of track. I stopped looking at how many people were listening to episode 1 because I wanted to know how many people were sticking with the show. And some people will bounce off your show because it's not going to be for everyone. Especially, I guess, if you're like a dark fantasy and a solo and all these other niche. And so I started looking at like episode 10. I figured if people make it to episode 10, they're probably with me. And so I started tracking how many people would pass by the episode 10 mark every week. And that number was extremely regular. And so, there was never any flashpoint. There was never any spike. I never had a D&D, glitterati say, hey, you should listen to this, and then suddenly 10,000 people listen to it for a day. That never happened. For me, it's been very much like being in, compared to being in a punk band. You tour and tour and tour and tour, and your audience grows by 3 and 5 and 10 and 20 and 25 people, and that's how you grow it. And then you wake up and you've been doing it 4 years and you have a following.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. All right, so I'm going to give you a what if, John. You and I run into each other 5 years from now, and it's the multiverse where hey, God, John, how you been? Good to see you. I've been dying to ask you, John, what happened to Maniticore? So in that multiverse, what do you think could have happened 5 years from now, where I would ask that question?
I think there's a decent chance I'm still going.
No, that's what I'm saying. There's many multiverses where I wouldn't say that because the show is still going. I'm talking about
if I was not.
Right.
If I was not doing that, I mentioned when I was a kid, we used to make things all the time, and we had that little rec room where we would make stuff with all the art supplies. I still am just addicted to making stuff. So if I'm not making this, I'm making something else. I have a bunch of really dumb, half-baked ideas in my head for shows that might happen. Maybe instead of a solo semi-actual play, I could figure out how to make a group semi-actual play, which is logistically much tougher, but theoretically it could work.
Yeah.
I had another idea of like, what if I was to get a 5-room dungeon? And I think this would have to be a video idea. I don't think it would work with a podcast. What if I had a 5-room dungeon and I invited 5 people to play through that dungeon as a one-shot? And that would be an episode. And the next episode would be the same dungeon, same traps, same monsters, new characters. And then how do they deal with those same problems in a different way? And then do it again and have a whole season that's the same 5-room dungeon, same monsters, same traps, same everything, different players.
Yeah.
That idea has been nibbling away at the back of my brain. Like,
that's a good idea.
Do that, but I can't. I'm totally rammed with Maniticore right now. I can't take on anything else.
Yeah, that would be a very interesting, really interesting thing. And we sometimes touch on it when you've been in a scenario, and I've done this where I've run the same quote unquote scenario a few times, and you're just amazed at how fast it goes off the rails that were laid by the first group and then the second group. Keep that boiling, my friend. That's a good idea.
I gotta learn YouTube. YouTube. Oh boy, YouTube is tough. YouTube is very tough. I respect for all you YouTubers.
Don't break your neck. It's a lot. It's a lot. Podcasting is easier. I'm not going to lie to you.
Yeah.
It's a lot. So, guys, we're going to take a quick break. When we get back from this break, we're going to talk about not making a podcast. We're going to be talking about making a game. I want to find out where the hell One Shot in the Dark came from. We'll be right back.
Are you enjoying our long-form interviews with creatives on this podcast? Maybe you're craving deeper discussions about our guests or some of the RPG plays on our Twitch and YouTube channel. Well, I've got an opportunity for you. You see, Third Floor Wars now has a Patreon-only Discord server. You can join a vibrant community of like-minded enthusiasts diving deep into every episode of our RPG plays and podcast. Connect with fans, engage in spirited discussions, and unlock the behind-the-scenes insights. For just $1 a month, access a world of tabletop gaming goodness. Connect with passionate gamers who share your love for the Tabletop Podcast and everything produced on the third floor. As a Patreon supporter, you also enjoy ad-free episodes of this podcast. You can immerse yourselves in captivating stories and fascinating interviews without interruptions, taking your listening experience to a whole new level. By joining the Third Floor Wars Patreon community, you not only gain exclusive access to the Patreon-only Discord server, but you also support the growth of my podcast and channels. Your contributions enable me to continue creating high-quality content that entertains, educates, and upskills tabletop enthusiasts like yourself. Maybe don't wait. Join the Third Floor Wars Patreon today and unlock a world of camaraderie, discussions, and knowledge. Visit patreon.com/Third Floor Wars or check the link in the show notes and come join our community. The Third Floor Wars Patreon-only Discord server awaits you. I and the other patrons can't wait to welcome you with open arms and a fistful of dice.
So when John and I connected, and I said, "You got to come on the show, or I'm not going to talk to you anymore." We were going back and forth. And I said, "Obviously, I want to talk about Tale of the Maniticore." I said, "But what else can we talk about?" And he mentioned One Shot in the Dark, which, in full transparency, I had not messed with. I hadn't looked at it before. Went and looked at it, grabbed it. I'm like, "Yeah, we definitely need to talk about this." So let me read the blurb for those of the audience, and then I got to figure out where the hell in our little story arc that we've just talked about, where you went from 10 years old to producing this hybrid new concept. Well, I got to figure out where One Shot in the Dark fits into it. So here's the blurb. It's a rules ultralight classic style fantasy RPG that can be played solo or with up to 4 people. It's a pick up and play game that requires 0 prep. It's also a true one-shot and can be played in full in a single session, usually in less time than it takes to watch a movie. A standard deck of playing cards and a set of polyhedral dice or a dice rolling app are required. All right, so...
That's a good blurb. Who wrote that?
Yeah, who wrote that? That's good. When does this itch start to appear? When do you find yourself going, I might need to make something? Was it similar to... if it's not out there, then you got to make what you want to play? Is that what happened here?
There's a bit of that in there. So,
okay.
So when I came back to the hobby, I came back like two horns bull rushing, charging forward. I was consuming a great deal of stuff because there was so much had happened while I was encased in ice. And then when I thought out, there were all of these things going on, like solo play. I didn't know that was a thing. And then I found out about Tana Pigeon's Mythic GM emulator, and that blew my darn mind. And it's genius. And then I found The Quiet Year. I bet you know The Quiet Year.
What a game.
Yeah, right?
What a game.
So when I came across this, I think I discovered it through podcasts, like most things I learn about or learned about at the time. And so I got a copy of this game, and I read it, and I loved it, and I played it with my partner who doesn't even play RPGs, and we had a great time playing it. And then I played it with my table group, and we had fun. And then I was a high school teacher at the time. I started playing it with my senior philosophy class because it's full of all of these like conundrums, like these like ethical decisions you got to make. And that was a hit, even though there were 30 of them. You can make it work. Just throw a gigantic map up on the blackboard, and if you want to play, I need you to pay attention and listen. And if you don't want to play, go ahead and use your phones. I know you're going to anyway, and sit in the back and chat. So I would run these games, and it kind of became my thing for a couple of years, where I was the teacher that would play this 2-day game at the end of term. And then I started playing it with an art class I was teaching, and a gifted English class I was anyway.
So cool.
I got some hours into this game, and I learned how to run it pretty well. I ran it at a convention last year, and I loved the mechanic. I thought it was so original and fresh, and nothing new under the sun. Oh yes, there is, because the engine behind this thing is so brilliant, and I don't know if it's Avery Alder, right?
Yeah,
I don't know if Avery came up with this. It was my first experience with this idea anyway.
Yeah, she stood on some shoulders.
Yeah,
but it was a situation where there was things that happened before it in the Forge.
For the Queen is a little bit in the same kind.
Very similar.
Bit, yeah.
Yeah, that's Alex who made For the Queen. What Alex and Avery both did is that they just blew out after that, right? So they did something that, yes, you could find hints of different games in the Quiet Year, hints of different concepts and ideas in For the Queen. But what they ended up with changes everything. It's the same thing that the Bakers did with Apocalypse World, right? Where yes, there was a lot leading up to this, but that was a watershed moment where the way I characterize it, there's a handful of games where I say this changed how people made games,
100%.
And in turn changed
it's not
how
overstating
people
it.
played games.
It's not overstating it. It's a total game changer, literally a game changer. Anyway, so I had this game in my head, and I was in awe, and I just loved it. And I think at this point I had tried a few one-shots and discovered, as many people will, that an actual one-shot is a pretty rare monster, because usually it's a 2 or a 3 shot, or it never finishes, or it fizzles, or something has to get gutted so that it could finish on time. And so I thought, well, there's a niche for a one shot that is an actual one shot. And so then I got an idea, like, what if a dungeon generator could follow the Quiet Year principles? And so instead of like drawing a card and it's a T intersection, or you roll a die and it's a 20 by 30 foot room, which is I think the kind of standard model for solo dungeon builders. What if we just threw all that in the trash and we just had a blank piece of paper, and the instruction was draw a room. There are 2 exits. And draw a card, and this shows that there's going to be a monster in it, but we don't know what it's going to be. And so that was the idea. It was kind of borrowing the idea of the Quiet Year and putting that into a dungeon crawler, dungeon generator, leaning a hard into classic tropes, to the point where it's well into cliched. It was by design. It's supposed to just be like a nostalgia trip. And so I put this thing together, and then I grabbed a bunch of friends and said, would you play test this? And sent them a draft, and it came back with just covered in red ink, so to speak. And some of the comments were like I had to take a beat, because they were like, you put loot in this game. Why would there be loot? What's the point of getting loot if you're blah, blah, blah? And I would take a step back, go, whoa, that was harsh, but also true. Right. And so all of these flaws were exposed through playtesting. So hot news. Playtesting is important. And I had to redesign the game. So what kind of went out to my playtesters, and what ended up happening was a very different, but also a much more robust kind of game so that it would work. Like, I hadn't anticipated, like, what if you draw yourself into a corner and there's no more exits and you're done. You can't finish the game. There has to be something baked into the system that makes that impossible to have happen. And I had this mechanic, like, if you draw the ace, you move on to the next level. And then it was like, well, what if I draw the ace on the first card? Now, do I just skip the whole first? So there had to be fixes for all of these possible problems. Anyway, eventually, I put the thing together. I used the best free artwork I could find, and oh boy, it's not great. I had a budget of $0, and so keep it in mind. And so I went out there, and I didn't have any experience. I'd never even heard of Pixabay. I didn't know what that was, and so I kind of just got the best stuff I could. I made it look as good as I could. I put pictures through filters so they would kind of look cohesive. We'll just say it's got charm, maybe. If I could see myself re-releasing it with better artwork. Anyway, it's functional.
For you as a creative, John, what did it give you? So going through this whole process from initial idea, putting together something, throwing it out there, getting it beat all to hell, coming back, tearing it apart, putting it back together, back and forth, back and forth. Now it's done. Now I'm going to go and lay it out. Right now I'm going to find artwork. This whole journey, what was the biggest thing that came out of it for you as a creative?
So at the time, I just did it because it was in my head and I needed to get it out.
Yeah.
And I thought there's a niche for this. And so it could work. And I have this growing platform so I can promote it on my own show.
Yeah.
And I was aware maybe some people will buy it in lieu of, like, I don't have a Patreon or anything like that or a Ko-fi. I thought, well, maybe some people will buy it to support the show. I'm going to make it very, very, very cheap. I thought about making it free, but I believe that if you make something free, people will psychologically think this is worthless.
It's worthless. Yep.
So put some token, it's $1.50. Put some token nominal fee on it, put it out there, and then it's just out there. If it, kind of like with the podcast, if 5 people buy it, okay, I would be disappointed. I thought maybe 50 or 100 people will buy it, and that was kind of the number I had in my head. If I could sell 50 or 100 copies of this, I'd be satisfied. And creatively, I didn't have any wish to make big money. I didn't have any wish to be a game designer. A lot of people are very, very into that, and I understand it, but I don't have that in me. I just thought, I have an idea. I'm going to make the thing, because I always just make a thing and put it out there, because once it's made, why not do that and then see how it goes? And then the reaction to it, and again, it didn't like rocket to stardom. It did the slow and steady thing, like everything else I've made. But there was one big surprise, and actually this was the thing that really was very kind of giving for me. People would tell me that they played it with their kid. And so cool. That I never expected. Now that I think about it, it makes perfect sense, because it's very, very simple, and you can explain the rules in like 2 minutes. And so people would do that. And then people would like send me photographs of them playing with their kid, or the map they made with their kid and some kid's drawing on it. Exactly. And my heart would break. I don't even have kids and my heart broke. And so that was the part that was the biggest surprise about One Shot in the Dark. It's done well, way better than I expected it to. It's very close to going platinum now, which again, I never would have expected that. Something like 1.5% of things on DriveThruRPG go platinum. Yeah. And I'm very close. I'm hoping this year, but we'll see. We'll see. But it was those emails and Instagram messages, and when people would say, I played this with my kid, or here's a picture, that slayed me. And I thought, wow, that is really touching. So that was the most rewarding part.
So John, we talked about you doing very similar to what I did, which is when I got back into this hobby, I just jumped off the cliff.
Yeah.
Money was flying out of my pocket. I just couldn't. I was like, let's do this.
Yep.
What were some of the biggies for you? We talked about A Quiet Year. What were some other games that just cracked your head open when you realized what had happened while you'd been sleeping?
Yeah. Well, Old School Essentials, even though it really is, it's BX reformatted.
Right. But better.
But it's better formatted, but it's almost verbatim. I think they ironed out a couple kinks. But there's an effort to be true to the source there that you can see. And so one of the big ones was the return to BX for me, or Old School Essentials, which I'll just say they're the same thing. It's splitting hairs to draw a distinction. And so, like I said, when I was a teenager, we went on to Advanced D&D and wouldn't have thought I'd ever go back because it seemed like it was for babies. I chose BX for the podcast because it was simple and rules light. I knew it backwards and forwards, and mostly I just didn't want to be spending time explaining rules and mechanics in a podcast. I wanted the tempo to be up and for non-old school players to be able to follow it easily. The medium is such that you can't place too large of a load on your listener information-wise, because I think they would just lose interest if it's too complicated. You have to use repetition in a way that you wouldn't in a game. Simplify things wherever possible. Those rulings over rules, that can be a real benefit, because now it's kind of interesting maybe to listen to a bit of somebody talking about why they do a thing. Again, not too much. And you keep moving. So BX is one thing. I never thought I'd be playing that again, and now I almost exclusively play that. Another one was Tana Pigeon's Mythic GME, which I think did I learn about that through Me, Myself, and Die? Maybe I learned about that through Me, Myself, and Die, or through some podcast, or maybe the combination of the two. And that was another one where I thought, well, Tana has changed the game completely. The action and subject tables. You're familiar?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that changes the way you do things, because it forces creativity is creativity through limitation, in a big way. And boy, does it ever work, to the point where I wish I had used it to begin with, but I wasn't aware of it until I was 6 months in, and then I would have been adding this extra mechanic and possibly a whole set of mechanics to a podcast where I already decided I need to keep things light. So I didn't. I'm a huge fan, but I didn't use it despite that. But I thought that was a game changer. And things like Ironsworn obviously use it a lot, and I think to great advantage. Paranoia was another eye-opener.
How so?
Just because that is a completely different style of playing, and I've only played it a handful of times, but it's hugely fun every time I do play it, because it's almost like an improv session, more than a D&D game is by far, in which you really try and make the other person look funny and look good, and the story doesn't matter at all, and it really is about the player interaction. Another one was Call of Cthulhu, which maybe I played that once when I was a kid. Maybe. I don't think I had the maturity back then, but playing it as an adult and understanding, like, your character's going to die horribly.
Right.
But maybe it could be the coolest thing ever. I love that, and I think that has influenced the way I play a D&D game now as well. I'm not too precious with my darlings. I bond with characters the same way everybody bonds with their characters, and I hope they don't die. But if they do, there is now a voice in my head that says, remember Call of Cthulhu. It's not about the character. It's about the story. It's about the world. You can make a new character in 2 minutes. So all of these things kind of changed the way I did things. The OSR in general is That's a surprise because, again, when I came back to the game, it was all 5e, and I was beginning to think maybe I don't belong in this world after all of gaming because I can't make it so that I like it. At least I wasn't able to. I tried a bunch of times. I just kept bouncing off it like hard, and then finally like OSR starts happening, and then I think I'm a part of this.
These are my people.
Yeah, these are my people.
So guys, we kind of dipped into it, but we're going to take a quick break and really get into this. We're going to take a quick break and we're going to find out what the hell John's been grooving on. We'll be right back.
Hey, it's me. I'm interrupting this episode, and I hope you're enjoying it, and I bet you're anxious to hear the rest. But before we jump back, I need a favor. Do you know someone who might enjoy this episode? Can you shoot them a quick message or maybe even send them a link to it? Listeners sharing this podcast was the primary reason we almost doubled our audience last year. Also, would you like to see and hear these games in action? Go to the Third Floor Wars YouTube channel and Twitch stream. Our actual plays combine compelling role-playing, character-driven action, and system tutorials. We create great stories while lifting the hood and showcasing the game mechanics. Links to both are in the show notes. Okay, last thing, and I mean it. Have you rated this podcast on your pod platform yet? Maybe even written a short review? It is a simple way for you to be even more awesome than you already are. Okay, now I'm done. Let's jump back and listen to the rest of this episode.
So John, as someone who listens, you know that this is my favorite segment, right? And this is getting an understanding of when you're not making, you're taking in, right? Mm-hmm. And we've talked about some of the games that you have been consuming. We talked about how the impact Quiet Year has had is not only consuming it, but then sharing it and giving it to others. Is there anything else out there lately? And it doesn't have to be game related. It could be a movie, a book, prestige TV or something that just snuck up on you, got in your head, and you have not been able to get it out.
So much. There's so much good stuff. Where to start? Let's start with like music, because when you're my age, it's a bit of a cliche to say like you're not finding new music, you're not trying to find new music, but I've discovered so much good stuff.
There's so much good music coming out now.
So let me throw a couple of names your way in case you haven't heard of them.
Please.
And then I'll have spread the good word. If you are a Ramones fan, probably my favorite band ever is the Ramones. They're my desert island band, I think. I can just listen to them forever. Anyway, there is a band called the Mean Jeans, and they are self-described as Ramones core, which happens to be a whole genre of music, it turns out.
That's something. Oh, anyway, God, we're so old.
Yeah. Anyway, the Mean Jeans, they do the Ramones arguably better and certainly more consistently than the Ramones. I love it. I love the Mean Jeans. Mean Jeans, if you're listening, hit me up. I want you on the show. There's another one of these bands, and they're, in a way, they're similar because they're sort of picking up the torch from another band of yesteryear. So there is a band called Joey Valence and Bray. Well, it's a duo.
God, I've not heard of them.
They are a hip-hop duo that basically picked up where the Beastie Boys put down Check Your Head. And they have it. They have a way of just getting that 90s hip-hop vibe back.
Yeah.
And I think they're actually blowing up quite mainstream right now, and being like very, very successful. So good for them. It's really, really high quality stuff. And I love to see it because I did sort of lose interest in mainstream music anyway for a good long while. What else is out there? Bands like Mastodon, which aren't exactly new, but
nope.
You know,
still putting out good stuff, man.
I think I only discovered them like 4 years ago or something like that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I came to that party late. And so they're doing a lot of exciting stuff, although that stuff is hit and miss for me. But I really dig that. Let's see.
I agree with you. When Mastodon is cooking with gas, they're just outstanding. But there's more than a few albums of theirs where I'm like, yeah, I'm good, guys.
I appreciate that they take a risk. I agree. I love that. The Moulettes. Have you heard the Moulettes before?
Dude, these are all new stuff for me. I'm so excited.
The Moulettes is a band that on paper, I probably would not even give 15 seconds of time for.
Why not? What are they on paper?
It's basically kind of a prog rock band with a lead bassoon.
Okay.
But check out the song Behemoth.
Mad Libs.
Yeah, right?
With a lead instrument.
You can't make this shit up. Check out the song Behemoth, and if you don't like it, I'll give you your money back.
Oh, that's great.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Really super talented. It shouldn't work. It totally works. You get the idea, like these are all like music school people that got together to form a band, and something magical happened. It's good.
Isn't it fun when you find an artist that is outside of your genre comfort zone like that, and they just knock your socks off? Yeah. I love that when that happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Any band that makes me like stop everything. I have to know what this is right now. And then you're getting Shazam on your phone just so that you can go and hope that commercial comes back on so you can hold your phone up to the TV.
One of my new fetishes for music has been, so I made a promise to myself when I was a kid, because when I was young, I was very much into Prince, Michael Jackson. I had a love for the quote unquote old music, my parents' music. So I had a huge passion for Beatles, Led Zeppelin, that whole, even back into the 50s when I was a teenager, I was listening to that stuff. And those were gifts from my parents because my parents loved music. But I would then try to return that favor and say, you need to listen to Prince. Like, this is like some amazing shit. And my parents just would bounce off of it. Sure. And I made a commitment to myself that I would not let that happen, that I would never stop listening to new music. But also under the understanding that at times new music is not being made for you anymore. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And what blows me away lately is finding artists that sound new, right? They sound in a type of style of music and stuff that just isn't me, right? It's my daughter's music. But I listened to them more than once, and my daughter has been a great conduit for this. And I realize, oh, holy shit, this artist is really, really good. Right. So they may not be making my kind of music. They may not be making music for me, but I feel like I have now a wide enough palette musically, and I'm sure yours is much wider as a musician, where you just go, okay, this may not be my music, but this person knows what the hell they're doing.
Good is good.
Love that.
If it sounds good, it is good. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I've been really enjoying that. All right. So what else has been tying up your brain?
In the world of movies, I've had some near hits and some good hits recently, but I think in our email conversation, I mentioned the last thing that really changed everything, I guess for me, was Martyrs. That movie broke my brain, and
you got to watch the original, not the remake. The remake's garbage.
Oh, I've never seen the remake. I have no interest in the remake.
Don't.
There's only a handful of movies that did that for me. That Army of Darkness.
Yeah.
And Evil Dead, really Evil Dead.
Yep.
Pulp Fiction. Psycho. Castaway. These are the movies that, for me, these are like, they change the way I imagine media in general, not even just movies. I take ideas from movies and music and I cram them into my podcast. I remember I was listening to Queens of the Stone Age. You know the song Cocaine?
Oh, God. I do.
With that 16th note piano thing that just never stops. Yep. At the end of that song, it has a false ending. And I remember listening to that and thinking, could an audio drama podcast have a false ending? And so I did it. I ran the credits, and then I interrupted my credits with a character banging on a pot and pan saying, "This is not over." And
that's awesome.
I love cramming ideas from one media into another. Robert Zemeckis, as a director, really taught me about like the match cut, where Tom Hanks says the word fire and then cut to a bonfire, or having a Kubrick moment where a bone gets thrown in the air and then you match cut it and it's a space station kind of sort of bone shaped in there. And then I was like, could I match cut in an audio drama? Why not? Why can't I match cut an audio drama?
How have you done that?
I just end a segment with some kind of strong image or word, and then I begin the next segment in a similar way. And it's the same concept exactly, and I'm sure nobody would notice, but I know it's there. and I'm always trying to add a bit of like art. Like I'd like it not to just be a game, but I'd like it to have some intentionality and some art and something where people would say like, "Oh, I know what you did there." Actually, here's a good example of that. I mentioned that Errol Otis picture from the basic handbook, which is a weapons rack. Yep. So I did a scene in season 2 where there's a knight training a squire, and there's a weapons rack that I just described from left to right, and I used the basic book, and I just followed that picture, and I didn't mention it. And one day later, I got somebody DM'd me on Twitter and said, "I can't believe that you used the basic that Errol Otis picture," and I couldn't believe that anybody had caught that. That just knocked my socks off, because I'm doing that Easter eggy kind of stuff all the time.
Sure.
It's just fun. I didn't think that a single person would catch that.
I've had that experience, and that is really cool. There'll be subtleties that I'll put into an actual play, or themes that I'll weave into an actual play that I think even my players miss. But then I'll get a message from somebody going, "I saw what you did there." That's kind of a neat feeling.
It's the English teacher coming through.
That's right. That's right. So we talked about a lot of not recent movies. You talk about Martyrs and what a huge impact that has had on you. Have you been exploring more foreign films like Martyrs and discovering things as well, or was that pretty unique for you?
So I kind of tried to soak up all of that French extremist horror, although nothing came close to Martyrs.
I agree.
Martyrs is just it's like taking ayahuasca or something. Like it's going to happen once and you're going to be different after. What else have I kind of got into Japanese movies for a while. My partner and I lived in Japan for about 6 years. So we're real Japanophiles, and we have this love of the culture. So we'll watch television from Japan and movies. And, I'd like to say I could watch it without subtitles, but I totally do need the subtitles. My language skills aren't that good. Korea is making, well, it's not a secret now, Korea is making great cinema, has been for a while.
Unbelievable. Have you seen The Wailing?
Yes. Really good.
What a movie.
Really good.
What a movie.
Yeah. I mean, Old Boy. That's in my top 10 too. Old Boy is just.
I've not seen Old Boy. I've got to put that on my list.
Listen, that's a run, don't walk. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like that is. I think it's going to be in your top 10 too. Ooh,
that's exciting. And
I think that's another one where they made a terrible remake. So make sure that it's the original.
To watch the original.
Yeah.
Got it. So I've been on a huge horror kick in these last 5 or 6 years, and watching a lot of stuff, and I have veered off. Like I found Korean horror, and I'm like, holy shit, this is incredible. Have you seen a movie called When Evil Lurks? It came out last year.
Yes, I just saw it. It's the Spanish one.
What did you think? Yes.
I had no expectations going into it other than that it came recommended.
Yep.
And it's one that, to me, it was not a smash hit. It's not going to live in the back of my brain for the rest of my life, along with Old Boy and Martyrs. But I totally appreciate that they took some risks there. So not my favorite. That's like Barbarian is in that category for me.
Yes. Barbarian is definitely in that category for me too. Yeah.
Appreciate what was going on.
Yep.
There is art there, but for me it wasn't a 10 out of 10 smash. Now I have to talk about Ari Aster, because Hereditary. That was another one where that one blew me away. Again, no expectations. I was going through this thing where I was getting DVDs from the library. Remember DVD players? So this was a while ago. Yeah. But I was just kind of going and getting I would just go there and come back with 3 or 4 discs. And so I watched this just zero expectations, figuring if I haven't heard of it, it must be terrible. But it was amazing. Totally subverted all expectations.
So amazing.
Yeah.
She is so amazing. As an actor by herself, she's amazing. But in that movie, I mean, that's without her, that movie doesn't have what it is. But it is. That is a powerful movie. A lot of people had problems with the end. I didn't.
I didn't at all.
I was fine with it. Yep, I was fine with it. I understood why some people struggled with it. But I had no trouble with it. Have you seen Babadook?
Yes, that's another one that's a 10. It's a 10.
Yeah, that's a hell of a
masterful.
Yep.
Masterful. And sometimes I wonder, what is it about horror movies that keeps me coming back? People have all kinds of reasons for this, and they all seem kind of true. Like, is it simulationist, survivalist thing? Like, oh, this is like you're learning how to deal with the stress. Well, I don't think that's what it is. But I don't know what it is. My best guess is that if it's like fight, flight, or freeze, I want to be fight, but I'm not. Yes. I'm freeze.
Right. Same.
And it feels good to finally tell somebody. And so I wonder if the movie is giving me something where you can almost to treat that problem. Maybe it's not a problem, but in my mind, I wish that wasn't the case. And so maybe somehow that safe danger experience is doing it. I don't know. I'm
in the process of going through the same thing you are, which is, I've always liked horror, but for some reason in the last 5 to 8 years, it's my primary consumption.
Yeah, it's my favorite thing.
The fiction I read, the movies I watch, and I've been trying to what the hell's going, am I okay? Right. Mm-hmm. And here's where I am. I think my love of horror shares a lot with my love of science fiction. And what I think horror and science fiction share is the ability to explore ideas that you can't explore in realism. Concepts. Hereditary is a good example of it. Babadook is a good example of it. When Evil Lurks is a good example. These are themes and concepts that you have to build a fantasy around to truly explore them. Fantasy as a genre does that, but it's so troped in many cases that it doesn't have the freedom. Horror does that for me. It lets me explore ideas in a way that I don't know if I could explore in a different way. The other thing that horror is doing for me right now is it's one of the few genres of movies that are still surprising me, not shocking me. Shock is easy. I love storytelling where the story goes in a place that I never saw coming until it got there, and it made total sense when it did. And that's a real tough thing to pull off for me. The late stage M. Night Shyamalan was an example of just surprising you, and you're like, what the hell is going on, right? Like this doesn't fit. This doesn't make sense. But when you pull that off, that is a big deal for me. And I'm only finding horror doing that on a consistent basis. So that's kind of where I am.
That makes sense.
I'm still surprised. I don't mind being scared. I don't mind eating spicy food, right? Like I'm okay, there. My wife cannot handle the stress of watching a horror movie. She doesn't enjoy the genre.
Same. Yeah.
But there's things that can be explored in horror, that I don't know, you can do anywhere else. And that's kind of where I am on that. But yeah, there is a couple times where I'm finally watching VHS. I've never watched that before. And that's one that I keep hearing about, and just started watching it. And that is doing a very interesting thing where it's really exploring some ideas. And for those of you that are listening that have not watched VHS, I'm going to do a little bit of a spoilery here. So fast forward, stop, whatever you want to do. But I just got done watching the part where the kids with the glasses that have the camera on it go to the bars and are doing some just really shitty men things, the way shitty men do at that age. And they pick up this woman, they take her back to a hotel room, some really bad shit's going down. And it explores that in a way that without the horror aspect of it, you wouldn't explore that theme the same way that they are. And so I'm eating up VHS right now. I had to stop it last night because I was too tired. So I haven't watched the second half of it, but first half of it, I'm like, I don't know where this movie's going to go. It could go downhill the rest of the way here. And I still am glad I've watched it because of that, exploring that part of our life where, that shit like that happens, but in a way that you just can't do if it was just about a bunch of rapey dudes, right? Super interesting.
I'm with you. You're making me think of The Boys. Are you up to date?
All right, so here's what I think about The Boys.
Is it horror? Some of those scenes are like, you could put it side by side with Terrifier and it would
shocking,
match.
Right, it's shocking. So I read the comic and I stopped. And the reason I stopped reading the comic is like, okay, I get it. I get what you're doing.
Yeah.
And now you're kind of doing it over and over again. I'm not seeing anything new here. So hats off. Great job, but I'm good. Right.
Yeah.
So I started watching the show. First season, I was like, okay, this is actually a pretty damn good job of taking the concepts of The Boys into a new medium and doing it successfully. It's not the same thing as the comic. I don't want the comic. I already read the comic. Started watching season 2 and I ended up in the same places that I was with.
A lot of people say that.
With the comic, where I was just like, again, great fucking job. And people that continue to love it and watch it, I get it. But for me, it's just like the point has been made and I just don't see what else there is. So, but I get why people have continued to watch it and love it. Well, shit, John. There's a lot of really cool things to do on a Thursday night that doesn't involve
old boy. Old boy.
I'm not kidding you. I've got my wife has made her sauce and I've got pasta ready. I'm going to have a big bowl of pasta with a bunch of meats, my wife's meat sauce on it, and I'm going to watch Old Boy. I'm super excited.
If you don't DM me and say like, so that was true. This is now in my top 10. I will be shocked.
Dude, when I get, I've got like certain people when I connect with them and we like vibe and I'm like, I get you, you get me. Then they give me a recommendation I've never heard of. I'm like, shit, let's go. I get so excited. I really appreciate you making the time, man.
Thank you so much. It's great. I've been looking forward to this interview because like I say, I've been following you for a little while now. And I just dig how you run interviews. I think you're the best out there.
Oh, that's a very kind thing to say. That means a lot to me, man. Thank you. Hey, for those of you listening, guess what? This is the end. You made it. And I really appreciate you doing that. Take care.
Hey, are you still here? Look, the podcast is over. And you sat through all of the breaks and bloopers? Well, I mean, if you're here, you might as well run over to patreon.com and become a supporter. Don't forget to rate and review this podcast too while you're at it, on whatever platform you're listening to. I do appreciate you sticking around. Take care.